Introduction of the Tosa Diary. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Avai in July 2012. The Tosa Diary by Kino Tsurayuki. Translated by William N. Porter. Introduction. The Tosa Nikki, or Tosa Diary, was written in the year 935 by Kino Tsurayuki, a court nobleman of high rank, who died in 946. He had been appointed governor of the province of Tosa in Shikoku in 930, the first year of the reign of the Emperor Sujaku, and the diary is an account of his journey home by sea to Kyoto, which was then the capital. The total distance is only some 200 miles, but in those days it was considered no small undertaking, and took, as the diary shows, 55 days to accomplish. This period, however, covered several long stops on the way, including a 10 days delay at Ominato. The boat used to convey such an important official would, no doubt, be of more than ordinary size, but there is nothing to tell us how large she was. A cabin is mentioned, but though we are told that on one occasion a sail was hoisted, they relied chiefly upon oars as a means of propulsion, for sails in those early days were but seldom used. They travelled very leisurely, camping each night upon shore, and remaining there the next day if the weather looked at all threatening. Mr. H.A.C. Bonnar's investigations on the subject of early Japanese shipping, as given in his paper read before the Asiatic Society of Japan in 1887, supply little or no information for this early period. He mentions an old canoe which was dug out near Osaka, the ancient port of Naniwa, in the year 1878, and is now shown in the permanent exhibition of that city. Its date could not be ascertained with any certainty, but it was estimated to be over 1,000 years old, which would carry it back approximately to the period of the Tosa Diary, and Tsurayuki's ship might very well have been something like it. Its shape is that of a large hollowed-out trunk of a tree. Its length is 37 feet 5 inches, and greatest width 4 feet 8 inches. Kino Tsurayuki was famous as a writer both of prose and poetry. Between the years 905 and 922, he, with assistance from others, compiled the Kokinshu, a famous collection of early Japanese poetry, to which he contributed a preface, which is much admired for its literary, though somewhat flowery, style. The Tosa Diary, which also ranks high among the literature of old Japan, is, however, written in a very different tone. The English reader will no doubt be struck by its artless simplicity and quiet humor, which is as welcome as it is unexpected from a Japanese nobleman of the 10th century. His sufferings from seasickness, his grief for the loss of his mirror, his pride when his little daughter composes a verse in reply to that made by a visitor whom he evidently dislikes, the endless verses of his own that he cannot resist quoting, and the way in which he depreciates the verses of others, as well as many other details, supply a very human touch to the diary. A characteristic feature of his style is the contrast of words he introduces, such as "he sang a song of the East, though he was still in the land of the West," and "his feelings were somewhat calmed, although the sea was still very rough," etc. The late Dr. Aston, in his History of Japanese Literature, writes, "The Tosa Nikki is a striking example of the importance of style. It contains no exciting adventures or romantic situations. There are in it no wise maxims or novel information. Its only merit is that it describes in simple yet elegant language, and with a vein of playful humor, the ordinary life of a traveler in Japan at the time when it was written. But this has proved sufficient to give it a high rank amongst Japanese classics, and has endured its being handed down to our own day as a most esteemed model for composition in the native Japanese style. It has been followed by many imitations, but has had no equal. The Japanese language as usually written is a combination of ideographic and phonetic characters, but Tsurayuki opens his diary by announcing that he intends to write it only in phonetics. As these were comparatively simple to learn, while a knowledge of the ideographs involved a profound study of the classical Chinese language, the former became known as the women's language, and the latter as the man's language. Tsurayuki, therefore, in order to justify his use of phonetics only, writes the diary in the character of a woman and mentions himself only in the third person, which adds considerably to the difficulties of the translator. He also calls himself by many different names, such as Yukuhito, the traveler, Funagimi, the passenger, but oftenest simply Aruhito, a certain personage. To assist the English reader, I have put in inverted commas such of these names as are supposed to indicate the writer himself. It is not known why he decided to dispense with ideographs and to use phonetics only, which at the time had been in use for barely 100 years. Possibly it was for the sake of simplicity and to enable the less educated to read his work. The Japanese commentators say that his rather cowardly dread of meeting the pirates and his excessive grief for his dead child would have been inconsistent with anything but a female writer. On the other hand, Tsurayuki may have emphasized these two features so as to give an artistic finish to a diary which is supposed to be written by a woman. With regard to the numerous verses quoted, they are all, with the exception of the two boat songs, written in the classical tanka meter, which was limited to 5 lines and 31 syllables, 5, 7, 5, 7, 7. The making of verses has always been one of the polite accomplishments in Japan, and Tsurayuki seldom misses an opportunity of composing. In the translation I have retained the original meter, and introduced a rhyme in the last couplet to emphasize the caesura between the third and fourth lines of the Japanese. It is a well-nigh hopeless task to attempt a translation of Japanese verses, which, while retaining the meter, is true to the original both in spirit and in letter, and it would not be fair to the illustrious poet to judge his work by the English version as given here. Perhaps I may paraphrase Tsurayuki as follows. People who read it will say to themselves that this kind of stuff is very poor. But the translator produced it with a good deal of difficulty, so they should stop whispering such cruel things about it. Owing to the change of calendar, the dates as given in the diary are apt to lead one astray, and I have therefore given the corresponding date in the Gregorian calendar for each entry. The accompanying sketch of the route taken by Kino Tsurayuki is only approximately correct, for it is not possible at this date to identify with certainty all the places named in the diary. Most of those marked on the sketch were taken from an excellent map of Japan in the possession of the Hydrographic Department of the Admiralty, which I was permitted to consult, and only 1 or 2 in addition to the 4 unnamed stopping places are conjectures. I should like to record here my grateful thanks to Mr. Choichi Fujino and to Major H. Haraguchi for their kind assistance in some of the more difficult passages. WNP. End of introduction. Section 1 of The Tosa Diary by Kino Tsurayuki, translated by William N. Porter. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Avai in July 2012. Oitaru wo chichitoseyo. Japanese proverb. That which is old should be treated with the respect due to a father. The Tosa Diary. It is generally a man who writes what is called a diary, but now a woman will see what she can do. Footnote. As explained in the introduction, this opening sentence means that the diary is to be written in the women's language, that is, in phonetic characters only, without the use of ideographs. And in order to be consistent, Tsurayuki writes as if he was a woman and mentions himself only in the third person, using different names such as a certain personage, the seafarer, etc. End of footnote. Anno Domini 935, 28th of January. 1 year on the 21st day of the 12th month, a certain personage left home at the hour of the dog, 8 p.m., which was the beginning of this modest record. He had just completed the usual period of 4 or 5 years as governor of a province. Everything had been wound up, documents, etc. had been handed over, and now he was about to go down to the place of embarkation, for he was to travel on shipboard. All sorts of people, both friends and strangers, came to see him off, including many who had served him faithfully during the past years, and who sorrowed at the thought of losing him that day. There was endless bustle and confusion, and so with one thing and another the night drew on. 29th of January, 22nd day. He prayed for a calm voyage to the land of Idzumi. Fujiwara no Tokisane came to turn his horse's head, although he was to travel by sea. Footnote. Uma no hanamuke means to turn your horse's nose, which was an old expression corresponding to our stirrup cup. It gradually came to mean any kind of farewell present made to one about to start on a journey. In this case, it evidently took the form of sake, and Tsurayuki himself notices how incongruous the expression is for one about to travel by sea. Elsewhere, I have translated it simply to make a farewell present. End of footnote. Upper, middle, and lower classes all drank too heavily, and, wonderful to relate, there they were on the edge of the salt sea itself, all useless and incompetent. Footnote. Salt is generally used to preserve food, and one would therefore naturally expect it to preserve the travelers, but here we find them by the side of a whole ocean of salt water, atsare, literally gone bad, like tainted meat or fish. End footnote. 30th of January, 23rd day. A certain man called Yagi no Yasunori, although he was of too high rank to have been one of his regular attendants in the province, openly made him a farewell present. Perhaps he had not made a very good governor, but still the country folk usually on an occasion like this just said goodbye and then disappeared, and here was a kind keru. And here was a kind heart which was not ashamed to come back again. This word of praise for him is not due to the present he brought. 31st of January, 24th day. The chief priest made him a farewell present, and accordingly everybody, high and low, even the very boys, got so intoxicated that those who did not know how to write one word found that their feet had playfully trodden the word 10 in the sand. Footnote. This refers to the staggering footprints of the intoxicated sailors on the shore. They were illiterate men, unable to form a single ideographic character, but Tsurayuki noticed that their feet had unconsciously made the character for 10, which is similar to our sign for plus. An alternative reading is that they staggered in 10 different directions, for tomoji, if written in phonetics only as the original was, would give both meanings. There seems to be another play upon words here also, for ashiwa, to, if read as one word, ashiato, means footprints. End of footnote. 1st of February, 25th day. A written invitation arrived from Government House, asking him to go and call. Footnote. This is the official residence of the governor of Tosa, recently occupied by Tsurayuki, but now given up to his successor, the new governor. End of footnote. He accordingly went to call, and, what with one thing and another, all day and all night passed away pleasantly, till at last the day broke. 2nd February, 26th day. Still at Government House, where the entertainment grew boisterous, the host and even the servants became uproarious. With loud voices Chinese poems were declaimed, and the host, the visitor, and the other guests recited Japanese verses. The Chinese poems are not recorded here, but the following is the Japanese verse composed by the governor as host. Footnote. The Chinese poems are not given because the writer, in his assumed role of a woman, would not be supposed to understand them or be able to write them down. The same expression, karauta, or Chinese poem, is frequently used elsewhere in the diary, meaning nothing more than classical verse, that is, the tanka, of which so many examples are given. End of footnote. From the capital far across the sea I came to see my lord. But alas, 'twas all in vain, for we must now part again. Whereupon the former governor composed this in reply. I too travelled far o'er the stormy road of waves, white with crested foam. Scarce I think another man would have faced the risks we ran. There were also verses composed by many others, but they were quite worthless. Having recited these, the late and the present governors descended together. The present and the late hosts went forth hand in hand, in good fellowship and the best of spirits. 3rd of February, 27th day. They started from Otsu and began to row to Urato. His little daughter, who had been born in the capital, had died a short time previously in the province very suddenly. Footnote. This was a little girl, 9 years of age, who had been born in Kyoto, the capital, and who accompanied her father to Tosa on his appointment to the governorship. She had recently died, and her parents were inconsolable for her loss. End footnote. And now, when, as we see, he was departing in haste, what was he to say? All his love was changed to grief, for he will now have no little daughter to return with him to the capital. It was more than most men could bear, but in this case a certain personage dragged out the following verse. Though I now return to my home, the capital, sad it is to think one for whom I mourn in vain never will return again. He composed the following also upon the same occasion. Could I e'er forget what is past, I still should grieve if she were not here. Seeking for her, I should say, where's my little girl today? Such were his words. At a place named Cape Kago, the governor's brother, footnote, that is, a brother of the newly appointed governor, end footnote. Some strangers and many others hurried down to the shore with sake and other good things to bid us sad farewell, and all the people from Government House who had come here spoke softly in the kindness of their hearts. To express their grief at parting, these good people clustered together upon the seashore and dragged out the following verse, which was as heavy as a net full of fishes. Like a flock of ducks, here among the reeds are we. Deeply we regret thy departure, and we would keep thee with us if we could. Footnote. Oshi means regret, as I have translated it, but it also suggests oshidori, mandarin ducks, which, as a symbol of happy married life, might refer to Tsurayuki and his wife, while ashikamo, the ducks among the reeds, are the friends who have come to bid farewell. End footnote. On this, the traveller with the greatest appreciation replied, "Sounding with my pole, bottom is there none, and thus, like the sea god's realm, bottomless my loving heart, when I think we now must part." The steersman, who had himself been freely eating and drinking sake while all this was going on, now remorselessly said that they must get away at once, for the tide was full and he feared the wind might blow and they would have a rough tossing in the ship. Footnote: this steersman, who acts as captain of the ship, is a character of great interest to Tsurayuki, who continually mentions him in the course of his diary. End footnote. Just about this time several others wrote appropriate verses. They were Chinese poems, and I have no doubt they were worthy of the occasion. A certain personage also sang a song of the East, though he was still in the land of the West. Footnote: Kai Uta can mean either a song of the East or a song of the sea, and probably both meanings are intended here. The province of Koshu, which lies to the east of the capital Kyoto, is also called Kai. Saikoku, the land of the west, refers to the province of Tosa because it lies west of Kyoto. The dust blowing about in the cabin and the clouds scudding across the sky are supposed to be agitated by the beauty of the songs they have just heard sung. End footnote. While these verses were being sung, we are told, even the dust in the cabin began to blow about and the clouds to scud across the sky. That evening a stop was made at Urato, to which spot Fujiwara no Tokisane and Tachibana no Suehira followed. Footnote: these two faithful friends, Fujiwara no Tokisane and Tachibana no Suehira, followed the departing governor to Ominato, the last spot in Tosa province at which the boat stops, and bid him a final farewell 10 days later. End footnote. 4th of February, 28th day. They set out rowing from Urato and made for Ominato, where Yamaguchi no Chimine, the son of a former governor, came with sake and good things to eat, which he put aboard the boat. There will be plenty to eat and drink during the voyage. 5th of February, 29th day. They remained at Ominato, and the doctor paid a visit in order to present some spiced sake and byakusan appropriate to the season, as well as ordinary sake. This he did from pure kindness of heart. Footnote: the doctor's present was to enable the travelers to celebrate the new year with all due honors. Spiced sake was then drunk to ensure long life. Byakusan, literally white powder, was, according to the dictionaries, a composition of Japanese pepper, cassia, campanula, and Atractyllis ovata, of which some parts, probably the roots or seeds, were dried, ground up small, mixed together, and added to the sake. End footnote. 6th of February, New Year's Day. Still they remained at the same place. The byakusan had been placed for safekeeping during the night in the ship's cabin, but the wind, which is usual at this time of year, got up and blew it all into the sea. They had nothing left to drink, no potatoes, no seaweed, and no rice cakes. The neighborhood could supply nothing of this kind, and so their wants could not be satisfied. They could do nothing more than suck the head of a trout. What must the trout have thought of everybody sucking it in turn? That day he could think of nothing but the capital, and talk of nothing but the straw rope stretched across the gates of the imperial palace, the mullet heads, and the holly. Footnote: these references are all to the customs and ceremonies of the new year. Potatoes were eaten then, to imply a wish that your family might be as numerous as the potatoes on one plant. Seaweed was a symbol of good luck and is supposed to refer to the recorded fact that when the Empress Jingo was about to embark with her armies for the subjugation of Korea in the year 202, her horses ran short of fodder, so she caused them to be fed on seaweed, which so refreshed and invigorated them that she secured a complete victory. Rice cakes made in the form of a mirror were supposed to harden the teeth if eaten at the new year, and mullet heads were sucked, it is said, to express a wish that you might be the head of a family. Tsurayuki had no mullets, nayoshi, but he had one trout, oshiayu, the names of which are not very dissimilar in the original. So the ship's company did the best they could by sucking it in turn, a process which evidently struck the writer as very disgusting. His thoughts turned longingly to Kyoto, where the New Year was being celebrated in a proper manner. The straw rope with tufts of straw or cut paper at intervals was hung over the doors of houses at the New Year. It commemorated the straw rope hung across the mouth of the cave in the time of the gods, which prevented the sun goddess from retiring again after she had been enticed out. End footnote. 7th of February, second day. Still at Ominato. The chief priest sent a gift of food and sake. End of section 1. Section 2 of The Tosa Diary by Kino Tsurayuki, translated by William N. Porter. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Avai in July 2012. 8th of February, third day. In the same place. I wonder if the wind and waves had a tender feeling for him, as they seemed to wish to delay him for some time. He certainly had no tender feeling for them. 9th of February, fourth day. No start was made, as a high wind was still blowing. Masatsura presented a gift of sake and other good things. A man who came with presents like this ought not to have come in vain, but there was literally nothing to offer him, and, though it all looked lively enough, his spirits were very low. 10th of February, fifth day. As the wind and waves had not gone down, they still remained at the same spot, and many people constantly came to call upon him. 11th February, sixth day, is the same as yesterday. 12th February. The seventh day came and found them still at the same port. This day his thoughts were fixed upon the festival of the Grey Horse, but it was of no good wishing for that, for all he could see were the white waves. Footnote. Ao Uma is literally a blue or green horse, that is, a grey horse. On the seventh day of the first month, 10 sacred grey horses which were kept at a temple in Kyoto were solemnly paraded before the emperor, while priestesses performed a sacred dance. Tsurayuki regrets that he can only see white waves now, when he would much rather be watching the parade of the grey horses. End footnote. About this time a present arrived from somebody's estate which was called Ike. Footnote. Ike means a pond or pool, and one would naturally expect carp to come from an estate bearing this name, but the writer says the present consisted of nearly every other kind of fish, but not carp. End footnote. A long box slung from a pole containing not carp, but many other kinds of river and sea fish, beginning with goldfish. Also green vegetables packed in a basket, pheasants, game, and flowers. The green vegetables reminded him what day it was, for they bore the following verse. Footnote. Wakana, green vegetables or young green shoots, were always picked on the 7th day of the first month. End footnote. Water is there none on the wild and lonely moor where the rushes grow, but from Ike, see, we bring fresh green shoots of early spring. A very amusing verse. This estate called Ike, he was told, was occupied by a lady of rank who had come down from the capital and who lived there with her husband. The contents of the long box were distributed among all, even the boys were not forgotten. They all had abundance to eat, and the sailors patted their bellies contentedly. The sea was so shocked at the sight that the waves began to get up, and while this was going on, many things happened. This day a man arrived with a servant carrying a box of food. What was his name? Perhaps I shall think of it soon. Well, this man had it in his mind that he would compose a poem. He talked about it a good deal, and then, taking as his subject the sad sight of the waves getting up, composed this: On thy journey hence, though the billows white with spray ever louder roar, when to thee farewell I call, my cries shall surpass them all. Well, that was his verse. He must truly have had a very loud voice, and his poem was hardly as good as what he brought. Everyone sympathized with this verse, but nobody composed one in reply, and, though there were so many there who could have done so, they merely bore it in silence. And so, with eating and drinking, the night drew on, till the poet got up and went off, promising to come back again. A certain personage's little child whispered, "I will make a verse in reply to his." What a surprise! And how very amusing! You can't compose a verse. If you think you can, please let us have it at once. She waited a moment for the man who had gone out and had promised to return, and then went to look for him, but the night had grown late and he did not come back. Meanwhile, we asked ourselves doubtfully what kind of verse this would be. The child was shy and unwilling to give it, but when spoken to firmly, she repeated this: See, the shore is wet with the stream of tears which pours from the sleeves of those who upon the beach must stay, or who go upon their way. That was her verse. How clever of her to get an idea like that! I did not think she could have done it. How could a mere child do so well? It is worthy of a woman or an old man. Well, whether it is poor or whatever it is, it shall be carefully preserved in case there may be an opportunity to send it to the poet. 13th February, 8th day. Something or other was wrong, and they still remained where they were. That evening the moon sank into the sea. The poet Narihira once watched the setting moon and sang, "Would the hills but fly away, longer might the moonlight stay." Footnote: The original verse by Ariwa no Narihira, who lived 825 to 80, is found in the 17th book of the Kokinshu and runs, Now the lovely moon, though I fain would watch it still, hides away from sight. Would the hills but fly away, longer might the moonlight stay. End footnote. If the poet, when he composed this, had been on the seashore, he would no doubt have written, Would the waves but bar the way, longer might the moonlight stay. Meditating still upon the verse, a certain personage composed this: Forward sails the moon on the river of the sky shining overhead. Like the lovely moon may we leave this port and put to sea. There. Footnote: The river of the sky is the Japanese name for the Milky Way. The moon is supposed to be floating on it like a boat. Ominato, where they have been detained ever since the 28th day of the previous month, means the great harbor, and Tsurayuki no doubt refers to this in the verse. End footnote. 14th February, 9th day. They set out from Ominato the first thing in the morning and rode on, intending to stop at Naba. All united in coming to bid him farewell, now that they were passing the boundaries of the province. Among many others, Fujiwara no Tokisane, Tachibana no Suehira, and Hasabe no Yukimasa, etc. From the day he left his official residence, people all the way along the route had come to see him off, and they all did it from kindness of heart. In fact, their kind hearts seemed to be as bottomless as the sea. At this spot, then, they parted and rode on, for it was here that these people had come to see him off. After this, as they rode gently forward, Those who remained upon the seashore grew further and further away, and they in their turn could no longer see those in the boat. From the shore they could not speak to the ship, and if the ship called to them, it was all in vain. This being so, he could only recite the following verse to himself. Far across the sea, in my heart I fly to you, bidding you farewell. But no written word, alas, from the ship to you may pass. After this they passed the pine forest of Uta. I know not how many pine trees there were there, nor for how many thousand years they had lived. Footnote. A pine tree is reputed to live for 1,000 years, and both it and the stork are emblems of long life. End footnote. The ripples lapped against the foot of each, and amid the branches of each the storks flitted about. Overcome by such a charming prospect, the seafarer composed this. On the shore the storks, perched amid the pine tree tops, charm my roving gaze. For 1,000 years, I ween, storks and pines fast friends have been. There. And the song is no more lovely than was the prospect. Still admiring the beautiful scene, they rowed gently forward. Mountains and sea all became dim, and the night drew on. As he could no longer distinguish east from west, he left all thought about the weather to the steersman. Those of the men who were unused to the sea began to feel gloomy and pensive, while the women laid their heads upon the bottom of the boat and cried aloud. But the steersmen and sailors thought nothing of it all and sang their boat song. This is it. In the fields this fine spring day I have cut my hand with the long grass growing there, and I cry aloud as I pick the greens. Endless is my parents' greed, but my mother must I feed. And when I go home, those I picked last night, they were pilfered by a thief, one who took the greens on tick, leaving not a cent, alack, and he has not yet come back. There was a good deal more of this sort of thing, but I will not record it. On hearing the others laughing at it, his feelings were somewhat calmed, although the sea was still very rough. It was now quite dark as they rowed forward, and on getting to their stopping place, a solitary old man and a solitary old woman among all the others, feeling unwell, took no food and retired to rest. Footnote. These are Tsurayuki and his wife, who were suffering from seasickness, which attacked all the passengers this day, and which was no doubt the reason of their not travelling on the following day. End footnote. 15th February, 10th day. Today they remained at this stopping place, Nawa. 16th February, 11th day. The boat started at break of day and headed for Murotsu. They were all still half asleep and accordingly took no notice of the condition of the sea. But the position of the moon indicated which was east and which was west, and so the day gradually became light. They washed their hands, performed their toilets, and by that time it was noon. At last they arrived at a place called Hane. A little child, on hearing the name of the place, asked if Hane got its name from the wings of a bird, and, while they were all laughing at such a childish question, a little girl composed this verse. If this place Hane chanced to have a pair of wings, as its name implies, may they help us in our need to the capital with speed. So she spoke. And, though it may not be a very good verse, everybody, men and women alike, who really wished in their hearts for a speedy voyage to the capital, pondered it over and kept it in mind. This child's question about the spot called Hane again reminded him of one who was gone. When will she ever be forgotten? Her mother, too, grieved today more than ever, and quoted an old verse to the effect that there is one missing out of those who went down from the capital. Was there in the flock last year one who does not reappear? Footnote. The whole verse is to be found in the 9th book of the Kokinshu, where it is stated to be by an unknown writer. A husband and wife journeyed together to a distant part of the country, where the husband died, and the sorrowing wife retraced her steps alone to the capital. On the journey, a flock of wild geese passed her with mournful cries as they flew north again after wintering in warm climates, and she then composed this verse. It runs, "Wild geese heading north with a sad and mournful cry. Whom do you lament? Was there in the flock last year one who does not reappear?" End footnote. Thinking over these words, somebody composed this. In the midst of life, cares in plenty though there be, yet the little child whom I loved beyond compare was by far my greatest care. And thus he expressed his feelings. 17th February, 12th day. The rain stopped, and the boat containing Fumitoki and Koremochi, who had been left behind, arrived at Murotsu from Narashitsu. 18th February, 13th day. The rain was gently falling at daybreak, but it soon stopped, and the men and women together went down to a suitable place in the vicinity and had a hot bath. Footnote. They evidently took advantage of some one of the natural hot springs in the neighborhood, of which there are so many in Japan. End footnote. Looking out over the sea, he composed this verse. Overhead the clouds look to me like rippling waves. Were the fishers here, which is sea and which is sky, I would ask, and they'd reply. Well, as it was after the 10th day, the moon was particularly beautiful. All these days, since first he set foot aboard ship, he had never worn his handsome bright scarlet costume, because he feared to offend the god of the sea. Yet... Footnote. The god of the sea, jealous of such a blaze of wealth and beauty, might have brought destruction upon the ship. The words within brackets are unsuited for translation. End footnote. End of section 2. Section 3 of The Tosa Diary by Kino Tsurayuki, translated by William N. Porter. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Avai in July 2012. 19th February, 14th day. Rain was falling at daybreak, so they remained where they were. The passenger was fasting, and, though it was now past the hour of the horse, noon, he had not even taken any vegetable food. But the steersman on the previous day had caught a bream, so, having no coppers, he successfully negotiated some rice for it. This transaction was often repeated, and he frequently traded rice and sake whenever the steersman happened to catch bream, and the latter's countenance became quite jovial in consequence. 20th February, 15th day. This day no rice and bean gruel was cooked, and, as it was an unlucky day, they crawled slowly along, much to his regret. Footnote. Rice and bean gruel used to be eaten on the 1st, 15th, and 28th days of the month, which is probably the reason why the writer mentions its omission on this occasion. As it was an inauspicious day for traveling, they might have courted disaster if they had moved at their usual rate. End footnote. Today the voyage had already lasted more than 20 days, and they were but as so many days wasted. While all were gazing out to sea, a little girl recited this. When the breezes drop, quickly do the waves subside. When the wind gets up, then the waves again arise. Comrade-like they sympathize. This is, no doubt, hardly worth giving, but it is very appropriate. 21st February, 16th day. As the wind and waves had not gone down, they remained where they were. He could think of nothing but, when will these wind-blown waves subside so that we may weather this terrible headland? However, as the wind and waves would not cease, a certain personage took these breaking waves as a subject and composed this verse. Never hoar frost falls on the ocean stretching wide, as is truly said. Yet the wave crests seem to be tipped with snow far out at sea. Ah, well, that day they had been travelling 25 days on shipboard. Footnote. This is hardly correct. It was 25 days since he left his official residence, but he spent 6 days in feasting before he really started. End footnote. 22nd February, 17th day. The heavy clouds cleared away, and the moonlight just before daybreak was very beautiful. The boat set out, and they went on rowing. What could the clouds overhead and the sea beneath be compared to? He rather fancied that when the moon is reflected in the waves, and the sailor plunges his pole down, the poets of old would have said that the vessel was attacking the heavens themselves in mid-ocean. He thought he had heard something of the kind, but was not sure. A certain personage then composed this. As I row along, at the bottom of the sea lies the lovely moon. There's a bush that grows on it. Is it that my pole has hit? Footnote. The Japanese say that they see a katsura bush growing on the face of the moon. End footnote. Somebody on hearing this replied, When I see its light 'neath the waves, I seem to be rowing all alone. Far across the heavenly sky, lone and desolate am I. With these words day at last broke, and the ship's officer said, Black clouds have unexpectedly come up. A storm is approaching, and the gallant ship must put back again. So they returned. Just then the rain began to fall, and he felt very melancholy. 23rd February, 18th day. They were still at the same spot. As long as the sea remains rough, they will never get there. The stopping place was very beautiful, whether looked at from afar or close at hand, but under the present conditions they were all too weary to take any pleasure in it. In order to pass the time, as it was hopeless to expect the boat to start, the men composed classical verses, etc., together, and a certain personage produced this. On this sandy shore never cease the waves to break, year and month alike, though 'tis white as if with snow, when it fell, I do not know. This verse was like an amateur's attempt, so he tried again as follows. Though upon the shore wind-blown waves break into foam white like flowers in bloom, neither nightingales nor spring knew these flowers were blossoming. On hearing it said that these verses were pretty good, the venerable master of the ship, to distract his thoughts which had been gloomy for a month, composed this. Footnote. The venerable master of the ship is no doubt intended for Tsurayuki himself, although the Kogi edition suggests as an alternative that it means the steersman. His gloomy thoughts perhaps refer to the death of his little daughter, to which he constantly makes allusion. In the following verse he combines both the similes expressed in his former attempts. End footnote. Driven by the wind, stormy billows getting up, crested white with foam, make me think them tipped with snow, or that 'tis the flowers that blow. Several people criticized these verses, and one man who was much interested in them made another one. But as his verse had 37 syllables, the others could not help laughing. Footnote. As explained in the introduction, the tanka or short verse was limited to 31 syllables. End footnote. The poet, however, kept a grave face and did not even smile. I could not make a verse like that if I tried. If it was written down, I doubt if I could read it, and if I find it hard now, who could ever manage it in the future? 24th February, 19th day. The weather was bad, so the boat could not start. 25th February, 20th day. Just as yesterday the boat could not start. All the people were sighing most dolefully, for their hearts were sad at wasting so many days. How many did they amount to already? 20? 30? It would make my fingers ache to count them. At night he could not sleep and was in a melancholy mood. The rising moon, 20 days old, came up out of the midst of the sea, for there were no mountain tops for it to rise from. With reference to that, men say that in the old days, when Abe no Nakamaro was about to cross over from China on his return, some of the country folk at the place of his embarkation gave him a farewell banquet to show their regret at his departure, and he then composed a classical poem. Footnote. Abe no Nakamaro was one of the greatest of the old poets. He died in the year 780. He had been sent on a mission to China, some say to discover the secret of the Chinese calendar, and he composed the verse which follows at a farewell banquet in the year 726, just before he started on his way home to Japan. End footnote. They did not grow weary until the moon rose on the night of the 20th day, and it was from the sea that the moon rose then also. While gazing at it, the great master Nakamaro said, "In my land, in the time of the gods, the deities themselves always composed poems like this, and still today all the people of the upper, middle, and lower classes do the same when bidding a sad farewell, and in times of joy and sorrow." He then composed this: I, while gazing far o'er the blue sea stretching wide, seem to see the moon rising o'er Mount Mikasa at the shrine of Kasuga. Footnote. This well-known verse is included in the anthology called Hyakunin Isshu, but there the first line is given as Amanohara, which would change the translation to I, while gazing up far into the heavenly sky. The temple of Kasuga was near Nara, Nakamaro's home, and the verse expresses his feelings of homesickness. End footnote. That is the verse. Though the people of that land did not seem to understand it when they heard it, yet when the proper words were written down in man's characters, Chinese ideographs, they understood it perfectly and were much pleased with it. In that faraway land of China the language was different, but the moonlight was still the same, and would not the hearts of men be the same also? With his thoughts still fixed upon those days, a certain personage composed this verse. In the capital oft I saw the moon arise o'er the mountain tops. Now she rises from the main, sinking in the waves again. 26th February, 21st day. The boat set forth about the hour of the hare, 6 a.m. Many other boats started as well, and the sight seemed to him like autumn leaves scattered upon the sea, although it was springtime. There was no breath of wind, no doubt in answer to their prayers for haze, and the sun was shining brightly as they set out rowing. About this time a boy who had come as his servant sang this boat song. Still can I cast my gaze far o'er the countryside. When I think of my father and of my mother, I long to return to them again. It was quite pathetic to hear him singing this, and the boat rowed on while they were still listening to it. Some birds called blackbirds were clustered upon the cliffs, and at the foot of these cliffs the waves were breaking into foam. The steersman remarked, "Under the blackbirds the white waves are breaking." These words, whatever they might be worth, sounded remarkable, and as he had never met a man like that before, he was much struck with them. At these words, and while still travelling on, he, who was the passenger, noticed the waves, and remembered that the pirates had threatened to take revenge upon him when once he had left the province. All his hair turned white when the waves once more became rough. 70 or 80 years are what one must expect at sea. Footnote. Tsurayuki as governor had had to dispense justice to these pirates, and they had threatened to take their revenge if they caught him at sea. He is afraid that they may now take him at a disadvantage if they meet him, for the sea is getting rough. His hair almost turns white with fear, but, as he says, dangers are so common at sea that it is only what one must expect. End footnote. White as snow my hair, waves roll in upon the shore, breaking into foam. Which is whiter? Canst thou say, warder of the isles, I pray? Tell me, steersman. 27th February, 22nd day. They rowed on from last night's stopping place to the next one. In the distance the hills were visible, and a lad on board, who was but 9 years old and looked much younger, fancied that these hills seemed to be following the boat as it was being rowed along, and composed this quaint verse. While I watch the shore from the swiftly moving ship, do the pine trees guess that the hills on which they grow seem to move along also? So he sang. How characteristic it is of a young lad's fancy. This day the sea was rough, and the waves broke into blossom, falling like snow upon the beach, whereupon a certain personage composed this. Not a sound I hear, save the tumult of the waves breaking into foam. Much I wonder at the sight, mingled snow and blossoms white. 28th February, 23rd day. The sun shone forth from the clouds, and, as there was said to be danger of pirates during the voyage, he prayed for protection to the Shinto and Buddhist gods. 1st March, 24th day. They remained at the same place as the day before. End of section 3. Section 4 of The Tosa Diary by Kino Tsurayuki, translated by William N. Porter. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Avai in July 2012. 2nd March, 25th day. The ship's officers said the north wind was unfavorable, so the boat did not start. There were many reports going about that the pirates were actually in pursuit. 3rd March, 26th day. Can this really be true? As they say the pirates are in chase, the boat is not to start before midnight, and offerings are to be made while rowing. The steersman accordingly offered prayer papers, and, as these fluttered away to the east, he prayed, "Graciously allow our gallant ship to be rowed with all speed in the direction taken by these prayer papers." Footnote. These nusa, or gohei, as they are generally called now, are pieces of white paper cut in a particular shape. Originally they represented votive offerings of pure white silk or cloth, and they are generally to be seen at Shinto temples. End footnote. On hearing this, a child made the following verse. To the deep sea god, he who rules the ocean road, make we now our prayer. For these flying nusa, pray, may the breeze not die away. This was her verse. As the wind was fair at the moment, the steersman was proud and happy in hoisting sail on the boat, and the women and children, as they heard the sound, were delighted, for they thought that now they would surely arrive sooner or later. Among them all, one called the matron of Awaji composed this. Footnote. This is one of Tsurayuki's attendants, possibly his housekeeper, who was, no doubt, a native of Awaji Island. End footnote. When the kindly breeze follows up behind the boat, fast we speed along. As we hoist the sail with glee, happy and content are we. And at the same time she prayed for fine weather. 4th March, 27th day. The wind blew, the waves were rough, and the boat could not start. They were all complaining dreadfully, so the men, to cheer up their hearts, composed a Chinese poem, to the effect that the capital was further away than the sun itself, and on hearing it, a certain woman composed this. In the sky the clouds ever nearer seem to draw, e'en the sun as well, but the capital today still seems very far away. To this a certain personage replied, Loud the tempests roar, not an instant dying down as we travel on, and our road across the sea ever longer seems to be. All day long the wind did not drop, so he snapped his fingers and retired to rest. Footnote. To snap the fingers was to ward off bad luck, in this case in the hope of making the wind die down. End footnote. 5th March, 28th day. The rain did not stop all through the night, nor in the morning either. 6th March, 29th day. The boat set out and the sun shone brightly as they went on rowing. Noticing that his nails had grown very long, he counted the days and found that it was a day of the rat. They must not be cut. Footnote. Instead of our week, the Japanese used to use the Chinese 12-day period, each day being called after one of the signs of the zodiac, of which the rat was the first. The first rat day of the year, or Ne-no-hi, was always kept as a holiday, when the proper thing to do was to go out and pick the fresh green sprouts of early spring, and pull up young pine tree shoots to ensure a long life. End footnote. As it was the first month, they chatted about the day of the rat in the capital, and wished there were some young pine trees for them to pull up. But as they were out at sea, such things were hard to find. A certain woman wrote this verse. Is it really true that today is Ne-no-hi? Were I a fishwife, I would dive down through the brine and pull up the salt sea pine. Footnote. Umimatsu, literally sea pine, is a name for coral. The idea is that a fisherwoman, being on the sea for the day of the rat, would do the best she could to pluck up a young pine by diving for coral. Sea pine. End footnote. Those were her words, but how can one write a day of the rat verse at sea? A certain personage replied with this. Though this is the day, yet we cannot pick the greens on Kasuga Moor. Never were they known to grow on the shore past which we row. They went on rowing while he was reciting this. On the boat approaching a delightful spot, he asked what place it was, and was told it was called Tosa Stopping Place. There was a woman on board who had once lived in the land called Tosa, and she said that in past days she had known a place of that name, but only for a short time. To express her regret for it, she composed this verse. Musing on the name of the place where once I lived for a year or so, billows rowing in from sea come to sympathize with me. 7th March, 30th day. The wind and rain had stopped, and so, hearing that the pirates never travel by night, the boat set out to cross the Awa Channel at midnight. It was so dark that they could not see which was east and which was west, but men and women prayed earnestly to the Shinto and Buddhist gods, and so the dreaded channel was crossed in safety. It was not till the hour of the tiger or the hare, 4 or 6 a.m., that they passed the Isle of Nujima, crossed the mouth of the Tanagawa, and, hurrying on as fast as possible, reached the Sea of Itsumi. That day there were no waves upon the sea, thanks to the blessings vouchsafed by the Shinto and Buddhist gods. Up to date, the days passed on board ship amounted to 39 days. Now that they had reached the land of Itsumi, there was no further question of pirates. 8th March, first day of the second month. Rain fell in the morning and stopped only at the hour of the horse, noon. Passing through the sea of Itsumi, they rode on. Just as yesterday, no wind-tossed waves were visible at sea. They passed the pine forest on Black Head. The name of the headland was Black, the color of its pines green, the breakers upon the shore white as snow, and the tint of its shells pink, so that only one color was wanting to complete the 5 primary colors. Footnote: the 5 primary colors, according to the Japanese, are black, white, red, blue or green, and yellow. End footnote. That day the boat was towed by a rope from the place named Casket Beach, and while traveling thus a certain personage composed this. Not a ripple breaks on the shore at Casket Beach, fair as jewel box. Could the brightest looking glass such a sea as this surpass? Once again the passenger spoke, lamenting that the voyage had lasted into this month, and for the many hardships they had endured, to which the others agreed. Out of the fullness of his heart he recited this. Though the days in spring grow as long as is the rope used to tow our boat, 40 days we've spent, maybe 50 days, upon the sea. People who hear this will say to themselves that this kind of stuff is very poor. But the passenger produced it with a good deal of difficulty and thought it pretty good, so they should stop whispering such cruel things about it. But suddenly the wind and waves got up, and so they had to stop talking. 9th March, second day. The wind and rain did not cease. For a whole day and night they prayed to the Shinto and Buddhist gods. 10th March, third day. Out at sea it was just like yesterday, so the boat did not start. The howling gale did not abate, and the waves dashed up against the cliffs and drew back again. Noting this, he composed the following. Fast my teardrops fall, but to twist a silken thread surely would be vain. Who could thread up pearls so frail? All my skill would not avail. Footnote: Tama means a pearl or jewel, or when used with namida, tears, it means teardrops. This verse is a play upon the double meaning. If only his teardrops were real pearls, he would preserve them by stringing them on a thread. End footnote. And thus the day drew to its close. 11th March, fourth day. The steersman said that the wind-blown clouds looked very threatening today, so the boat did not set out. However, the wind and waves did not get up the whole day long. This steersman was not always right in his forecast of the weather. Beautiful shells of many kinds and pebbles were plentiful on the shore where they camped, and with reference to them, somebody belonging to the ship composed this verse in memory of one who was much loved. Hear the breaking waves come and go as I lament for my darling child. Stooping I to bid farewell, pick up a forgetting shell. Footnote: Wasuregai, literally forgetting shell, is a black and gray clamshell, often mentioned in old Japanese poetry. Its signification is the exact opposite of our forget-me-not flower. The writer of this verse is supposed to have been Tsurayuki's wife, the mother of his dead child. End footnote. Such were her words, but a certain personage, unable to bear it any longer, composed this, to give heart to the others in the ship. Here no more will stray seeking for forgetting shells, but a dainty pearl, pure and white, might serve to tell of the child we loved so well. Thus he spoke in memory of his little daughter, for a parent is apt to become very childish. Some may object that she was not like a pearl. Be that as it may, the child is dead, and it is no empty compliment to say she had a beautiful face. A certain woman composed this verse in grief at the number of days spent in the same place. Long we've soaked our hands in Itsumi's icy spring, dreading not the cold. Here though many days we waste, 'tis a spring we never taste. Footnote. This is a play upon the word Itsumi, the name of the province on whose shores they were camping, which means a spring of water. End footnote. 12th March, 5th day. This day, with difficulty, they hastened on through the sea of Itsumi to the stopping place of Otsu. To his eye the pine forests seemed never-ending, everything seemed to have gone wrong, and he composed this. Though we speed along, yet the pine trees on the cliffs never seem to pass. Long as thread is Otsu's strand, spun out by a maiden's hand. At these words, and while they still travelled on, the steersman called to the sailors to pull hard, for the weather was about to improve. On this gallant ship my command must be obeyed. This is what I say. Ere the morning north wind blow, get the ropes ashore and tow, said he. The poetic form of these words was quite unintentional on the part of the steersman, and, on being appealed to, he said he did not mean it for a verse, but on putting into writing the queer poetical sentence, the man was heard to say, there proved indeed to be just over 30 syllables, that is, 31 syllables. This day everyone prayed all day long that the waves outside might not arise, and in answer to their prayers the wind and waves did not get up. Soon they arrived at a place where flocks of seagulls sported about, and in an excess of joy at getting so near the capital, a child composed this. Though the wind has dropped, for the gods have heard our prayers, in my dizzy brain swooping seagulls look to me like the ever-surging sea. While she recited this, they travelled on. The pine forest at a place called Iwatsu was very beautiful, but the shore seemed interminable. Once more, as they rode past Tsumiyoshi, a certain personage composed this. Suminoye's pines, as I watch them, seem to me younger far than I. I shall vanish from the scene, but the pines are ever green. Footnote. Suminoye and Tsumiyoshi are one and the same place. End footnote. And here the mother of one now gone, whom she never forgets for a day or even for a moment, urge the boat along on to Suminoye beach, for I long to pick some forgetting grass, to see if it will come true with me. Footnote. Wazureguza, forgetting grass, is an old word for reeds or rushes, which seem to have grown in great profusion about Naniwa and Suminoye. The name is used in the same sense as the forgetting shells mentioned in the entry for the previous day. End footnote. This she said not because she wished to forget really, but she hoped that her sorrow might find some short relief, in order that her love might return stronger than ever. With these words, then, they travelled on, while still gazing at the prospect. But suddenly the wind arose, and, though they rowed hard, they drifted quickly astern and nearly capsized, when they must have all been lost. The steersman said, "This holy deity of Sumiyoshi is a well-known god, and he desires some gift." How like everybody else! Someone suggested that nusa should be offered, and so accordingly an offering of prayer papers was made. But, though it was done chiefly for the wind to abate, it began to blow harder than ever, and the waves rose accordingly, so that they were in great danger. Then the steersman spoke again and said, "As the august heart of the god has not been moved by the prayer papers, the gallant ship cannot proceed. In making an offering, therefore, something should be presented that will be thought of value." Accordingly, what was to be done? He had 2 eyes, but could offer only 1 mirror, so to his deep regret it was thrown into the sea. Footnote. The old Japanese mirror was made of bronze with a highly polished face, and a back generally elaborately decorated. End footnote. Well, immediately the scene became as calm as the looking-glass itself, and a certain personage composed this. In the raging sea I have cast my looking-glass, and the gift's result shows the partiality of the awful deity. Verily there are no gods as kindly as the forgetting-grass of Suminoye or the delicate pines upon its cliffs. Plainly in the mirror could his eyes see the august heart of the god, which was remarkably like the heart of the steersman. Footnote. This sly cut at the steersman shows that Tsurayuki, who was genuinely distressed at the loss of his mirror, was skeptical about the god of Suminoye. End footnote. End of section 4. Section 5 of The Tosa Diary by Kino Tsurayuki, translated by William N. Porter. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Avai in July 2012. 13th March, 6th day. They left Myotsukushi, reached the port of Naniwa, and entered the mouth of the river. Footnote. Myotsukushi means a tide gorge. It was set up off the port of Naniwa and is frequently mentioned in old Japanese poetry. End footnote. Everyone, men, women, and children, lifted their hands to their foreheads and exclaimed in delight, "There is nothing like this!" The old lady of Awaji Isle was seasick, but on hearing that they were getting near the capital, she raised her head from the bottom of the boat, and in her delight recited this verse. Many doubts had I on the day we first set forth. Now our gallant ship gently glides from danger far mid the reeds of Naniwa. Everybody was astonished when she came out with this so unexpectedly, and among them the passenger, who was also feeling unwell, praised it very highly, and said it was not what he had expected from one with such a seasick countenance. 14th March, 7th day. This day the boat left the mouth of the river, but as they rowed on, the river tide was ebbing and they were in great difficulty. To get the boat up was very hard. At this, the sick passenger, who was not very practical by nature, was wholly at a loss to know what should be done. However, he was so pleased with the matron of Awaji's verse that he comforted himself with the thought that he would soon be at the capital, and so with some difficulty he turned out this very doubtful verse. Here at last are we, but how shallow runs the stream in the river bed. Further can the boat not go, here must we remain also. It was because he was so unwell that he composed this poor sort of thing. As he was not satisfied with it, here is another. Fast we'd hurry on, if the river's shallow bed did not stay our boat. As the stream runs dry, maybe it has got a grudge at me. These verses should be understood as composed when he could not repress his joy at getting so near the capital, but they are not as good as the one by her ladyship of Awaji, and, feeling jealous of her, he regretted having made them. So, as the night was drawing on, he retired to sleep. 15th March, 8th day. Still keeping to the riverside, they stopped at a place called the Gamekeeper's Preserve. That evening, the passenger suffered severely from his chronic complaint. Footnote. A note in the Kogi edition said that this chronic complaint was some disease of old age, otherwise one would have thought it might have had reference to the remains of his attack of seasickness, from which he had not yet recovered. To fish with a grain of rice is equivalent to our expression, to fish with a sprat for a whale. End footnote. There was a man who came with some trifling gift, who got some rice in return, that is, a large present, and the man whispered among themselves that he had come to fish with a grain of rice. But this sort of thing may happen anywhere. This day he was fasting and ate no fish. 16th March, 9th day. From early dawn he was very anxious. They ascended the river towing the boat, but as there was hardly any water in the river, they had to push and haul it along. At last they came to a place called the Parting of the Ways at the stopping place of Wada, and there rice and fish were supplied to them at their request. While towing the boat up like this, they saw on their way a place called the Shore Residence. This residence, as one pictured to oneself the days of old, was a very delightful spot. On the hill behind were many pine trees, while in the garden in front the plum trees were in full blossom. Here, they said, here was a place famous in past days, for on this spot General Ariwara no Narihira lived in companionship with His Royal Highness Prince Koretaka. If the cherry trees never more burst forth in bloom, 'twould be better far, for the saddest time of all is the spring when petals fall. Footnote. This verse by Ariwara no Narihira is to be found in the first book of the Kokinshu. End footnote. And this is the spot where he composed this verse. Now a certain personage in his delight at the place composed this. For 1,000 years have these pine trees lived, their tops rustle as of old. 'Tis a language drear and strange, and their voice will never change. This also he composed. Still the plum trees bloom round this dwelling as of old, and in memory of their lord they loved so well, still retain their ancient smell. While these were being recited, they went on rejoicing at getting nearer at the capital. Among all the people thus going up, not one had any children when they left the capital, but some had babies born in the province. Everybody crowded down to the place where the boat stopped to embrace these children, and at the sight of this the mother of that child who is gone could no longer restrain her grief. Many who set forth childless from the capital bring a baby back. One who then a daughter had, now returns bereft and sad. With these words she wept. And when the father heard it, what could he do? He wished to make a similar verse, but there was no other subject. For here, as in China, we compose a poem when our hearts are too full of feeling. That evening they stopped at a place called Udono. 17th March, 10th day. There was something wrong and they did not go forward. 18th March, 11th day. Gentle rain was falling, so they remained where they were for a little. Then, on going forward, something came into view into the east across the mountains, which a man, on being asked, said was the temple of Hachiman, the god of war. On hearing this, they all reverently made obeisance and offered prayers. See, there is Yamasaki Bridge. There was no limit to their delight, and there, opposite the Sō temple, the boat stopped for a little time, while they made their various arrangements. Near the precincts of this temple were many willow trees, and a certain personage, seeing them reflected at the bottom of the river, composed this. Looking o'er the stream, imaged on the rippling waves as they come and go, hanging willow branches green, woven like silk threads are seen. 19th March, 12th day. They remained at Yamasaki. 20th March, 13th day. Still at Yamasaki. 21st March, 14th day. Rain fell. This day he sent to the capital for a carriage. 22nd March, 15th day. This day the carriage arrived. Owing to the dirt on board, he removed from the boat to the house of a friend. This friend's house seemed indeed a delightful change, and its owner treated him with the greatest kindness, so much so that he felt quite sorry for troubling him, and tried to make returns in many ways. Those who entered and left the house, too, were by no means disagreeable people, but cultivated gentlefolk. 23rd March, 16th day. That evening, as he went up to the capital, he saw in the shops at Yamazaki the little boxes painted with pictures and the rice cakes twisted into the shape of conch shells, just the same as ever, and he wondered if the hearts of the shopkeepers also were the same. Footnote. Does this hint that Tsurayuki had on a former occasion found the shopkeepers not quite honest? End footnote. After this, on the road to the capital, many people, and not necessarily his own relations, entertained him at Shimasaka. Indeed, they were more hospitable on his return than when he set out, and in some way or other he would have liked to make some return for it. Planning to arrive at the capital by night, he did not hasten. The moon had risen, and he crossed the Katsura River in bright moonlight. Everyone said that as this was not the Asuka River, it would not suddenly change itself to eddies and rapids, and a certain personage composed this. Footnote. The Asuka River, notorious for sudden spates and rapids, was as uncertain as its name, which, read as Asuka, means who knows what the morrow will bring. End footnote. Neath the moon of heaven flows the river Katsura, slowly growing old. In its depths the moon lies low, as it did long, long ago. Footnote. A second meaning is that the Katsura bush, which is supposed to be visible on the face of the moon, is growing old, but still the moon's reflection in the Katsura River remains the same. End footnote. He recited this also. Once Katsura's stream seemed to me as far away as the clouds of heaven. Now, while crossing, I perceive it has wet my dipping sleeve. And again he composed this. Well, I know my heart and the river Katsura never were alike, yet in depth my heart would seem not unlike the flowing stream. These too many verses are due to his excessive pleasure at reaching the capital. The night was growing late, and some places could not be seen, but it was delightful to enter the capital once more. On reaching his home and entering his door, the moon was so bright that he could see the state of things at a glance. Needless to say, the whole place was hopelessly overgrown and ragged, even more than he had been told. The heart of the man to whom he had entrusted his home must be as waste as it. Their two houses, separated only by a hedge, looked as if they were both one, so he had hopefully left it in his charge, and had never failed to send him a present on every opportunity. Well, that evening he determined he would not speak about it in a loud tone of voice, and, though he felt very angry, he had to make some sort of acknowledgement. Then again the ground had sunk and was full of water, as if it was a pond. There was a pine tree close by, and it had overgrown in 5 or 6 years as if in 1,000 years. Half its branches were dead, and the young growing ones all in confusion. Almost everything was the same, and everybody offered him their sympathy. He recalled especially how his little daughter had been born in that house, in its beloved interior. How sad it was that she had not returned with them. The sailors and others were talking loudly as they embraced their children, and just then his grief was more than he could bear. So to one who sympathized with his feelings, he softly whispered this verse: "Never to return to our home where she was born. Ah, how pitiful! Yet the pine tree shoots live on, though our little girl is gone." Thus he spoke. And if that is not enough, here is yet one more. Could I have endowed with the pine tree's 1,000 years one I used to see, parted from her nevermore, all my sorrows would be o'er. His sorrows which he can never forget are more than he can ever express. Well, well, this must be torn up at once. End of section 5. End of The Tosa Diary by Kino Tsurayuki, translated by William N. Porter. Thanks for listening.